Montana Territory, 1882. Ethan Kane stared at his infant son's tear-streaked face, the baby's cries echoing through the lonely cabin like accusations. 3 weeks since Sarah had died in childbirth, and little Thomas was wasting away before his eyes. Ethan's large, calloused hands, so skilled with horses and cattle, felt clumsy trying to comfort the hungry child. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours straight since the funeral, and desperation was setting in as the baby's wails grew weaker each day. "I don't know what to do," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry." A knock at the door startled him. Who would visit their remote ranch at dusk? Cradling Thomas against his chest, Ethan crossed the room and pulled the door open. She stood on his porch like an apparition, a young woman with honey-brown hair spilling from beneath her bonnet, her blue dress dusty from travel. But what caught Ethan's attention was the way she held herself, one arm crossed protectively over her chest. "Mr. Kane?" she asked, her voice soft but determined. "My name is Bethany Ellis. I heard about your situation in town. I recently lost my baby, but my milk has come in strong. I thought perhaps I could help yours." Ethan stood frozen, unable to process the salvation standing before him. In his arms, Thomas let out another pitiful cry. That sound broke the spell. "Please," he said, stepping back, "come in." Bethany had ridden 6 miles from the neighboring farm where she worked as a housekeeper. The journey had been difficult in her condition, her breasts swollen and aching with milk meant for a child who would never drink it. Her baby girl had been born too early, living only long enough for Bethany to hold her once. The grief was still raw, a wound that reopened each time her body reminded her it was ready to nurture a life that was no longer there. When she'd overheard the general store owner's wife speaking of the Kane Ranch tragedy, a young widower alone with a newborn, something had stirred within her. Perhaps here was purpose in her pain. Now, seated in a rough-hewn chair by the fireplace, Bethany cradled the starving infant. Ethan Kane had turned his back to give her privacy as she unbuttoned her bodice to offer her breast to the child. Thomas latched immediately, his desperate hunger giving way to contented suckling. "He's taking to it," she said quietly. Poor little one was famished. Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the window, where the last light of day was fading. His broad shoulders were tense beneath his work shirt, his dark brown hair curling slightly at the nape of his neck. At 24, he hadn't expected to be a widower with a newborn son. His handsome face, normally quick to smile according to those who knew him, now seemed permanently etched with grief. "I tried everything," he said, his voice low. "Goat's milk, sugar water. Nothing stayed down. I was about to ride for the doctor in Helena, but that's nearly 2 days' journey. I wasn't sure he would." He couldn't finish the sentence. "He's going to be fine now," Bethany assured him, studying the tiny face at her breast. "He has good color returning already." What she didn't say was how right it felt to hold this child, how the emptiness inside her seemed less vast with Thomas in her arms. And she certainly didn't mention how her heart had quickened when Ethan Kane had opened his door, his green eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, but still striking against his tanned skin. As Thomas drifted to sleep, milk-drunk and satisfied, Bethany wondered what would happen next. She couldn't bear to leave this child to hunger again, but she had obligations, a position to maintain. And Ethan Kane was a stranger, a man whose life had been shattered just as thoroughly as her own. What she didn't know was that Ethan was wondering the same thing, staring into the gathering darkness and feeling, for the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope. "You can turn around now, Mr. Kane," Bethany said, adjusting her dress. "He's sleeping." Ethan turned to see his son peacefully nestled in the young woman's arms, tiny lips parted in contentment. The transformation was immediate and stunning. The angry red of Thomas's face had faded, replaced by the peaceful slumber that had eluded him for days. "I don't know how to thank you," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've saved his life, Miss Ellis." "Bethany, please," she corrected gently. "And there's no need for thanks. I needed this too." Her eyes met his, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding of loss that required no explanation. "May I ask about your situation?" Ethan ventured carefully. "You mentioned you work at a farm?" Bethany nodded. "The Marshall's place. I'm their housekeeper, though Mrs. Marshall has been kind enough to give me time to recover." She glanced down at Thomas. "My Emma was born too early. She lived only a few hours." Ethan's expression softened. I'm sorry. Truly. A silence fell between them, filled only by Thomas's soft breathing. I should return before dark, Bethany said finally, though she made no move to relinquish the baby. It's already dark, Ethan pointed out. The trail to the Marshalls isn't safe at night, especially alone. Bethany bit her lip. I hadn't thought of that. I was so focused on getting here. Stay the night, Ethan said, then quickly added, I'll sleep in the barn. You and Thomas can have the cabin. And tomorrow. He hesitated. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next. Because I don't think I can watch my son starve again. The admission hung in the air between them, a vulnerability that surprised them both. I don't want him to starve either, Bethany whispered. Outside, an owl called into the night, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. Inside the cabin, two broken souls contemplated a future neither had imagined at dawn. The Marshalls were surprisingly understanding when Bethany explained her arrangement with Ethan Kane. Perhaps it was because Mrs. Marshall had lost 2 infants herself before her surviving children, or perhaps it was the genuine plea in Bethany's eyes when she asked for their blessing to move to the Kane ranch temporarily. It's not proper, a young unmarried woman living at a widower's ranch, Mrs. Marshall had said, though her tone lacked conviction. I'll stay in the cabin with Thomas. Mr. Kane sleeps in the bunkhouse with his ranch hands, Bethany explained, the slight alteration of truth burning her conscience. In reality, Ethan had moved a cot into the storage room attached to the main cabin, close enough to help with Thomas if needed, but separated enough to maintain propriety, at least in their minds. For how long? Mr. Marshall had asked. Until the baby is weaned, Bethany had replied, not meeting his eyes. A few months at most. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now, as May turned to June, the Montana landscape exploded into green life, and the Kane ranch settled into a new routine. Ethan worked from dawn until dusk, mending fences, tending cattle, breaking horses, while Bethany cared for Thomas, kept the cabin, and prepared meals. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, Thomas sleeping against Bethany's chest, and talk. At first, their conversations were practical, Thomas's feeding schedule, ranch supplies needed from town, weather forecasts. But gradually, they began to share more. Ethan spoke of growing up on his father's ranch in Colorado, his move to Montana to start his own spread 5 years earlier, meeting Sarah and Helena during a cattle sale. Bethany told him about her childhood in Illinois, her journey west after her parents died of influenza, her brief marriage to a freight driver who'd been killed in a river-crossing accident before Emma was born. What remained unspoken was how they both anticipated those evening conversations, how Ethan found himself rushing to finish his chores, how Bethany would watch the horizon for his return. Neither mentioned how Thomas now slept in a cradle that Ethan had crafted, positioned perfectly between Bethany's bed in the cabin and the doorway to Ethan's makeshift room. And neither dared acknowledge the moment their hands had brushed when passing the baby between them, or how they had both frozen, eyes locked, hearts racing, before Ethan had cleared his throat and stepped back. You've put on weight, little man, Ethan said to Thomas one evening, bouncing the 3-month-old on his knee while Bethany hung laundry on the line. The baby gurgled happily, his tiny hands grabbing at his father's shirt buttons. He's growing so fast, Bethany called over her shoulder, pinning one of Ethan's shirts against the prairie wind. Soon he'll be ready for his first taste of solid food. The words hung between them, an unintentional reminder that their arrangement had an expiration date. Ethan's smile faltered. I received a letter today, he said, his tone carefully neutral. From my sister in Denver. She knows a widow there, with a young child of her own. She offered to send her to help with Thomas. Bethany's hands stilled on the laundry. I see, she said, not turning around. That's very practical. I haven't replied yet, Ethan added quickly. I wanted to discuss it with you first. Now she did turn, her honey-brown hair escaping its pins in the breeze. There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Kane. We both knew this was temporary. She gestured vaguely toward her chest, where the fullness that had saved Thomas's life was gradually diminishing as he required less frequent feedings. Ethan stood, settling Thomas against his shoulder. I thought perhaps a rider appeared on the horizon, cutting off whatever Ethan had been about to say. As the figure approached, Ethan recognized Jack Peterson, one of the hands from the neighboring Preston ranch. Kane, Peterson called, reining in his horse. Got trouble brewing. Preston's reporting rustlers hit his north pasture last night. 30 head missing. He's gathering men for a posse. Ethan's expression hardened. When? First light tomorrow. Meeting at Preston's main house. I'll be there, Ethan confirmed. As Peterson rode off, Ethan turned to Bethany, whose face had gone pale. Rustlers, she whispered. Don't worry, Ethan said, handing Thomas to her. They won't come this way, but I need to help Preston. Those cattle are his livelihood. Bethany held Thomas tightly. How long will you be gone? Hard to say. Could be a few days, maybe a week if we have to track them into the mountains. Ethan hesitated. Will you be all right here alone? I could ask one of the marshals to check on you. Pride straightened Bethany's spine. We'll be fine. I know how to use a rifle. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. You do? My father taught me, and my husband insisted I keep practicing. A small, sad smile touched her lips. I haven't forgotten. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, respect, perhaps, or admiration. I'll show you where I keep the Winchester before I leave. As he walked toward the house, Bethany called after him. Mr. Kane, what were you going to say? Before Mr. Peterson arrived? Ethan paused, looking back at her standing in the yard, laundry fluttering around her like white flags. Thomas settled contentedly against her. The words he'd been about to speak, asking her to stay, not as a wet nurse, but as something more, suddenly seemed impossible. Nothing important, he said finally. Just ranch business. We can discuss it when I return. The disappointment that flickered across Bethany's face was gone so quickly, he convinced himself he'd imagined it. The posse departed at dawn, 12 men armed with rifles and determination. Ethan had spent the night checking his gear and giving Bethany instructions, where the extra ammunition was stored, which neighbors to signal if there was trouble, how to operate the pump if the well handle stuck. I'll be back as soon as I can, he'd promised, standing awkwardly by the door, hat in hand. We'll be here, Bethany had replied, Thomas drowsing against her shoulder. For 3 days, the cabin felt emptier than Bethany could have imagined. She jumped at every sound, the rifle never far from reach. On the 4th night, a tremendous thunderstorm rolled across the plains. Lightning split the sky, thunder shaking the cabin's foundation. Thomas wailed, inconsolable despite Bethany's efforts to soothe him. Hush, little one, she murmured, pacing the floor. Your papa will be home soon. The word startled her. When had she begun thinking of Ethan as Thomas's papa rather than Mr. Kane? And when had this cabin begun to feel like home? The realization brought both comfort and dread. She had allowed herself to become attached, to Thomas, to Ethan, to this life that wasn't truly hers. A particularly violent thunderclap rattled the windows, and Thomas screamed in terror. In that same instant, the cabin door burst open. Bethany whirled, reaching for the rifle, only to drop her hand when she recognized the soaking figure in the doorway. Ethan, he stumbled inside, dripping water onto the floor. His face was haggard, a week's worth of stubble darkening his jaw, but his eyes lit up at the sight of her and Thomas. You're back, Bethany said unnecessarily, relief making her lightheaded. Did you find the rustlers? Ethan nodded, shrugging out of his sodden coat. Caught them trying to cross into Idaho territory. Preston got his cattle back. He ran a hand through his wet hair. I would have been back sooner, but the storm slowed us down. Another lightning strike illuminated the cabin, followed immediately by a deafening thunderclap. Thomas wailed again, and Ethan crossed to them in 2 strides. He's afraid of the storm, Bethany explained, bouncing the baby gently. May I? Ethan held out his arms, and Bethany transferred Thomas to him. The baby continued crying, tiny fists balled against his father's chest. It's all right, Thomas, Ethan murmured. Just the sky having a conversation with the earth. Nothing to fear. To Bethany's amazement, Thomas's cries began to subside. The baby hiccuped, staring up at his father with wide eyes. That's it, Ethan continued, his deep voice rumbling soothingly. We're all safe here together. Together. The word hung in the air as the storm raged outside. Bethany watched father and son, her heart constricting painfully. This moment of domestic tranquility was everything she had lost, everything she had begun to hope for again, despite her best intentions. I should make you something hot to drink, she said, needing distance from the tableau before her. You must be chilled to the bone. Bethany, Ethan said, stopping her retreat. There's something I need to tell you. She turned back, steeling herself. Was this when he would tell her about the widow from Denver, about arrangements being made for her replacement? While I was gone, Ethan continued, I had a lot of time to think. About Thomas. About you. About what happens next. I understand, Bethany said quickly. Thomas is nearly weaned. You need to make permanent arrangements. Yes, Ethan agreed, his green eyes intent on her face. That's exactly what I want to do. Bethany swallowed hard, forcing herself to maintain composure. Your sister's friend, the widow from Denver. I'm not bringing a stranger from Denver, Ethan interrupted. I'm asking you to stay. Bethany stared at him, certain she had misheard. Stay? As Thomas's nurse? As my wife. The words fell between them like stones into still water, ripples of consequence expanding outward. Your wife, Bethany whispered. Ethan stepped closer, Thomas now drowsing against his shoulder, the storm forgotten. I know it's sudden. I know you came here out of kindness, not looking for this. But these past months, watching you with Thomas, talking with you each evening. He took a deep breath. I never expected to feel this way again after Sarah died. I didn't think it was possible. Ethan, Bethany began, her voice unsteady. You don't have to. I'm not offering marriage out of obligation, he cut in, reading her thoughts. Or convenience, though I won't deny there's practicality in it. I'm offering because I find myself thinking about you when we're apart. Because Thomas loves you. Because I believe I could make you happy, given the chance. Bethany's eyes filled with tears. And if my milk dries up completely? If I can't have more children? Then Thomas will still have the mother who saved his life, Ethan said simply. And I'll still have the woman I've come to care for deeply. A tremendous crash of thunder punctuated his words, making them both jump. Thomas stirred but didn't wake. I don't expect an answer tonight, Ethan said. It's a big decision. Take all the time you need. But Bethany was already shaking her head, not in refusal, but in wonder. I don't need time, she said. I've had nothing but time to think about what this place, what you and Thomas, have come to mean to me. Hope dawned in Ethan's eyes. And, instead of answering, Bethany closed the distance between them. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, chaste, but it contained a promise that made Ethan's breath catch. Is that a yes? He asked when she pulled away. Bethany smiled, her first truly unguarded smile since the day they met. Yes, Ethan Kane. I'll stay as your wife. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, a different kind of electricity filled the air, the current of possibility, of future, of love taking root in soil made fertile by shared grief and unexpected joy. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Helena, with Thomas dressed in a christening gown that Mrs. Marshall had insisted on sewing for the occasion. The ceremony was simple, Ethan in his best suit, Bethany in a pale blue dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, the Marshalls serving as witnesses, and the circuit-riding preacher officiating. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher declared, and just like that, Bethany Ellis became Bethany Kane. The return journey to the ranch was filled with a nervous anticipation neither of them acknowledged. They had maintained propriety throughout their unusual courtship, with Ethan steadfastly sleeping in his separate room despite the growing tension between them. Now, as husband and wife, everything would change. As the wagon crested the final hill, the Kane ranch came into view. The sturdy log cabin, the barn, the corrals, the sweep of grassland stretching to the distant mountains. Ethan reined in the horses, turning to Bethany. Welcome home, Mrs. Kane. The title sent a thrill through her. It feels strange, she admitted. Good strange, but strange nonetheless. Having second thoughts? Ethan asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. Bethany shook her head firmly. Not one. They continued down the slope, and as they approached the cabin, Bethany noticed something different. What's that? She asked, pointing to a new structure attached to the main cabin. Ethan's ears reddened slightly. A surprise. I had the hands work on it while we were in Helena. When they reached the cabin, Bethany handed a sleeping Thomas to Ethan and climbed down from the wagon to investigate. What she found brought tears to her eyes, a new bedroom addition, with a large window overlooking the valley, a proper bed frame with a fresh mattress, and a rocking chair positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. You did all this in 2 days? She asked, turning to find Ethan watching her reaction from the doorway. Thomas still cradled in one arm. The men worked through the night, he confessed. They were happy to do it. They've grown fond of you and Thomas. Bethany ran her hand along the smooth wood of the bed frame. It's beautiful. There's more, Ethan said, gesturing toward a door on the far wall. Go see. Bethany crossed the room and opened the door to reveal a small adjoining room, empty save for Thomas's cradle and a chest of drawers. A nursery, she breathed. For now, Ethan said, coming to stand behind her. And perhaps someday, for more little Kanes. The implication sent heat rushing to Bethany's cheeks. She turned to face him, suddenly very aware of his proximity, of Thomas sleeping peacefully in his arms, of the bed just feet away. I should put him down, Ethan murmured, seeming to read her thoughts. He moved past her to settle Thomas in his cradle, tucking the blanket around the sleeping infant with practiced ease. When he straightened and turned back to Bethany, something had changed in his expression, a guardedness replaced by open desire. Bethany, he said, her name a question and an invitation. She crossed to him slowly, heart hammering. When she reached him, she placed her palm against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart. I never thought I would have this again, she whispered. A home, a family, a husband. Ethan covered her hand with his own. When Sarah died, I thought that was the end of happiness for me. I was just trying to survive, to keep Thomas alive. I never expected you. Life has a way of surprising us, Bethany said. Indeed it does, Mrs. Kane. Ethan's free hand came up to cup her cheek. May I kiss my wife? Instead of answering, Bethany rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. Unlike their first kiss, this one deepened immediately. Years of loneliness and months of growing affection channeled into a connection that left them both breathless when they finally pulled apart. I should check on the horses, Ethan said, his voice rough. Unload our things. Bethany caught his hand as he turned to leave. The horses can wait, she said softly. I can't. Autumn came to Montana in a blaze of gold and amber. The aspens on the mountainsides turned, the prairie grasses ripened, and the Kane ranch prepared for winter. Thomas, now 8 months old, had begun crawling, exploring his expanding world with determined curiosity. He had also, gradually and without fanfare, transitioned fully to solid foods, no longer requiring the sustenance that had first brought Bethany into their lives. He tried to pull himself up on the corral fence today. Ethan reported one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular hues. Nearly gave me heart failure. Bethany laughed, leaning against her husband's shoulder. He's determined to walk before his first birthday. Just like his mother, Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Stubborn and brave. The comment, casual as it was, warmed Bethany from within. In the 4 months since their marriage, she had truly become Thomas's mother in every way that mattered. The boy reached for her as readily as for Ethan, called Mama as one of his first words, and sought her comfort when hurt or tired. I received a letter from the Marshalls today, Bethany said, changing the subject. Mrs. Marshall is organizing a harvest social next week. She specifically requested we attend. Ethan groaned good-naturedly. Dancing and small talk? Must we? Yes, Bethany said firmly. We've been married 4 months, and we've hardly socialized at all. People will think you're keeping me prisoner. Would that be so terrible? Ethan teased, pulling her closer. Having you all to myself. Terribly selfish, Bethany retorted, though she made no move to increase the distance between them. They sat in comfortable silence as the sunset faded and the first stars appeared. I have something to tell you, Bethany said finally, her voice soft but steady. Ethan turned to look at her. What is it? I went to see Dr. Wilson in town yesterday, while you thought I was visiting the mercantile. Concern immediately etched itself on Ethan's features. Are you ill? Why didn't you tell me? I'm not ill, Bethany assured him, taking his hand and guiding it to rest against her still flat stomach. I'm with child. Ethan went utterly still, his eyes wide in the gathering darkness. A baby? Our baby. Bethany nodded, suddenly anxious. The doctor says I'm about 2 months along. The baby should come in late spring. For a moment, Ethan said nothing, and doubt crept into Bethany's heart. Then, without warning, he stood, pulling her to her feet and lifting her in a gentle but exuberant embrace. A baby, he repeated, wonder in his voice. Oh, Bethany. When he set her down, she saw tears glistening in his eyes. "You're happy then?" she asked, needing to hear the words. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Ethan said, cupping her face in his hands. "When you came to our door that day, with milk for my starving son, I thought you were saving his life. I didn't realize you were saving mine as well." "We saved each other," Bethany corrected, covering his hands with her own. "And now we're building something new together." Inside the cabin, Thomas called out, awakening from his evening nap. Ethan pressed one more kiss to Bethany's lips before they went to tend to their son, their steps perfectly in sync, their hearts beating to the same rhythm of hope, of family, of love that had found them when they least expected it but needed it most. As the Montana night deepened around the small cabin, the lights within glowed with the warmth of a family made not by blood alone, but by choice, by circumstance, by the courage to open hearts scarred by loss to the possibility of new beginnings. And in the spring, when Bethany gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Emma Sarah Kane, the circle that had begun with a desperate knock on a cabin door in the fading light of a Montana evening was completed. Two souls who had sat alone with their grief found in each other not just companionship, but a love that transformed their separate tragedies into a shared joy greater than either could have imagined.